I came home to fire the woman I believed was endangering my fragile children, convinced she was an incompetent fraud. But the secret she held about my family, and the magic she worked on my son, instantly undid every one of my certainties. The leather of the steering wheel creaked under my white-knuckled grip. Each word my mother spoke through the car's Bluetooth system was like another stone added to the crushing weight on my chest. "Alistair, are you listening to me? The woman is incompetent. The silver wasn't polished for the brunch I hosted, and I found dust, actual dust on the mantel. But that's not the worst of it. I navigated the sleek black sedan through the gates of my own estate, my jaw so tight it ached. "I'm listening, Mother." "It's her attitude," she hissed. "She's overly familiar with the children. She coddles them, sings to them like she's their... Well, you know, it's not her place. She's hired help, not family, and I don't trust her with their medical regimen. Yesterday, I'm sure I saw her giving Leo a biscuit that wasn't on his approved dietary list. When I confronted her, she had the audacity to claim it was a special hypoallergenic recipe she made herself. Lies, Alistair. You pay for a professional, not a well-meaning amateur who could put your sons' lives at risk." That was the line. The one that turned my simmering frustration into cold, decisive fury. Leo and Lily, my 5-year-old twins. They were the only pure good thing left in my life since Elena passed. Their laughter was the only music that could penetrate the silence of our cavernous house, but their bodies were fragile. A severe respiratory condition meant their lives were a minefield of triggers dust, pollen, the wrong kind of food. A simple cold for another child could mean a hospital stay for them. Their care was not something to be taken lightly. It was everything. "I'll handle it, Mother," I said, my voice dangerously calm. I was already pulling into the garage, the engine's purr the only sound. "Handle it? Alistair, you need to fire her. Today, before she does real damage. Your children need structure, discipline, not songs and homemade biscuits." I ended the call without another word. My mother meant well in her own abrasive, controlling way, but she had planted a seed of doubt that had grown into a monstrous tree of conviction. I had hired the maid, Clara, 3 months ago in a haze of grief and desperation. The agency had recommended her highly, citing her experience with special needs children. I was working 60, sometimes 70 hours a week trying to keep my company afloat, trying to numb the gaping wound Elena's absence had left. I didn't have time to vet her properly. I just needed someone. Now it seemed I had made a catastrophic mistake. I entered the house not through the front door, but through the utility entrance from the garage. I wanted the element of surprise. The house was unnervingly quiet. It was 3 p.m., the time when the twins were usually having their afternoon breathing treatments, a process that often involved tears and tantrums. The silence was a bad sign. It meant neglect. It meant Clara was probably on her phone or watching television, letting my children fend for themselves. I moved silently through the marble-floored hall, my expensive shoes making no sound. I glanced into the formal dining room. My mother was right. The silver candelabras on the sideboard lacked their usual mirror-like gleam. A thin film of dust, visible only in the sharp afternoon light, coated the grand mahogany table. Anger, cold and sharp, twisted in my gut. Negligence. It was all the proof I needed. My path was set. I walked towards the west wing, towards the children's playroom, which doubled as their treatment area. I rehearsed the words in my head. "Clara, your services are no longer required. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. Please gather your things and be gone within the hour." It was blunt, corporate, the way I handled all my problems, efficiently and without emotion. As I neared the playroom door, which was slightly ajar, I finally heard a sound. It wasn't the television or the tinny audio of a phone video. It was a soft, rhythmic sound, a gentle shooshing, interspersed with a quiet, humming melody. I frowned. My anger warred with a flicker of confusion. I pushed the door open without a sound. The scene inside stopped my heart. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a salt lamp. Lily was on a playmat, meticulously arranging wooden blocks, her face a mask of concentration. She was fine. But Leo... Leo was in Clara's arms, his small body tense. The nebulizer mask was on his face, a thin stream of vapor puffing out with each shaky breath. His eyes were squeezed shut, and tiny tears were tracing paths down his flushed cheeks. He was on the verge of a full-blown panic attack, the kind that always made his breathing worse. But Clara wasn't flustered. She was rocking him, her body a steady, calming anchor. Her back was to me, so she didn't see me standing there, a specter in the doorway. She was humming, yes, but then she began to sing. Her voice a soft, clear whisper meant only for my son's ears. And the words she sang, the melody that wrapped around Leo like a warm blanket, was a lullaby I hadn't heard in 2 years. It was Elena's lullaby, the one she'd made up for them, the one she sang every single night, the one I thought I would never hear again. Clara smoothed Leo's hair back from his forehead, her touch infinitely gentle. "It's okay, my little lion," she whispered between verses, her voice thick with an affection that couldn't be faked. "Just breathe with me. You're so brave, just like your mama always said." My breath hitched in my chest. My legs felt like they were made of stone. This wasn't the lazy, incompetent, dangerous woman my mother had described. This was something else entirely. This was a woman holding my terrified child, calming him with a ghost's song. And the words I had come to say, the cold, corporate execution I had practiced, died in my throat. I backed away from the doorway, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It felt sacrilegious, like I had stumbled into a sanctuary where I didn't belong. The anger I had carried into the house had evaporated, leaving behind a confusing storm of grief, shock, and a strange, unwelcome flicker of gratitude. I retreated into the hall, leaning against the cool wall, trying to process the impossible scene. Elena's lullaby. It was a secret melody, a sacred text in the private religion of our family. She never wrote it down. She never recorded it. It existed only in her voice and in our memories. For this stranger, this maid, to know it, it felt like a violation, a theft of the most precious thing I had left of my wife. And yet, through the door, I could hear Leo's ragged breathing evening out. The terrified whimpers had ceased, replaced by the steady puff of the nebulizer. She had worked a magic I had failed to master countless times. My own attempts to soothe him during treatments usually ended with both of us in tears. I was a fixer, a CEO. I could command a boardroom of sharks, but I was utterly inept at calming the fears of my own 5-year-old son. I pushed myself off the wall. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide. I was the master of this house. I needed an explanation. I walked back to the doorway and cleared my throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Clara's head snapped around. Her eyes, a warm, gentle brown, widened in surprise. She hadn't seen me before. There was no guilt in her expression, no fear of being caught, just a sudden awareness, like a dreamer pulled abruptly into the waking world. She carefully adjusted Leo in her arms, her movements fluid and practiced. He was almost asleep, his small chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice a respectful murmur, "I didn't hear you come in." I stepped fully into the room, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. The rehearsed words of termination were a distant memory. Only one question remained. "The song," I said, my voice hoarse. "Where did you learn that song?" A delicate blush crept up her neck. She looked down at Leo, then back at me. Her gaze was direct, unflinching. "I'm sorry if I overstepped. It helps him relax. The vibration of the humming seems to soothe his airways during the treatment." "That's not what I asked," I pressed, my voice harder than I intended. "I asked where you learned it." She took a quiet breath, her decision made. "From Elena," she said softly. The name hit me like a physical blow. "That's impossible. You never met my wife." "No, I never had the honor," she agreed, her voice laced with a genuine sadness that caught me off guard. "But I knew of her. Years ago, before the twins were even born, I followed a blog. It was called The Silver Lining. It was written by a woman anonymously, chronicling her journey with a high-risk pregnancy and her own battles with a chronic illness. She wrote with such hope, Such strength! She wrote about her husband, the man who was her rock. And she wrote about the lullaby she was composing for her unborn children, a melody to promise them they were safe. My world tilted on its axis. Elena's blog. It was her secret place, her outlet. I knew she wrote, but I had respected her privacy. I never read it, Clara continued, her eyes misty with memory. She stopped writing after the twins were born. I always wondered what happened to her, to that family. When the agency told me about this position, a widower, twin 5-year-olds with a severe respiratory condition, I knew. It had to be you. When I saw their pictures in your study, I was sure of it. I found the lullaby again, tucked away in an old post. I memorized it. I hoped it might bring them some comfort, a piece of her. She looked at me, her expression open, vulnerable. She had unearthed a part of my wife I had never known and brought it back into this house to heal my children. The homemade hypoallergenic biscuits, the unpolished silver. It all clicked into place. She wasn't neglecting her duties. She was prioritizing what truly mattered. She was giving my children the one thing my money couldn't buy, and I didn't know how to give. A mother's touch, even a borrowed one. The sheer depth of her empathy, her quiet, unassuming dedication, was staggering. My mother's accusations felt like petty, venomous lies. Dust on a mantle versus the peace of my child. It wasn't a contest. I opened my mouth to say something. Thank you. I'm sorry. I don't know what. But a sharp, hacking sound from the other side of the room cut through the air. We both turned. Lily, who had been playing so quietly, was now on her hands and knees. Her small body was racked with a cough I knew all too well. It was a dry, barking seal of a cough, the terrifying prelude to a full-blown attack. Her face was turning pale, her eyes wide with panic as she struggled for air. I froze, pure, cold terror seizing me. My mind went blank. The emergency protocols, the doctor's instructions, all of it vanished in a wave of parental dread. But Clara didn't hesitate for a second. In one smooth motion, she placed the now sleeping Leo in his crib and crossed the room to Lily. She scooped my daughter into her arms, pressing her ear to her back, listening. Her face was grim. She looked up at me, and the gentle, empathetic woman was gone. In her place was a field general, her eyes sharp, her voice ringing with absolute authority. Her airway is closing. Get her emergency inhaler and the portable oximeter. Now. I stared at her, still paralyzed. Mr. Henderson. She snapped, her voice cutting through my fear like a scalpel. Move, then call an ambulance. Tell them it's an anaphylactic reaction. Her command shattered the ice in my veins. The paralysis broke. Anaphylaxis. The word was a death knell, our greatest fear. I pivoted and ran, my mind suddenly, terrifyingly clear. I wrenched open the drawer of the medical cart we kept in the playroom, my hands fumbling over sterile packages and boxes. Inhaler, oximeter. My fingers closed around them, the plastic cool against my sweaty skin. When I turned back, Clara was already in motion. She had Lily propped against her, murmuring to her in that same impossibly calm tone she'd used with Leo, but her movements were urgent and precise. It's okay, my little flower. We're going to help you breathe. Just stay with me. I handed her the inhaler, and she worked with a speed and efficiency that was breathtaking. She shook it, inserted it into the spacer, and pressed the mask gently but firmly over Lily's mouth and nose. Okay, Lilybug, on my count. A big breath in. 1, 2, 3. She administered the puff of albuterol, her eyes never leaving my daughter's face. I clipped the pulse oximeter onto Lily's tiny finger, my hand shaking so badly I could barely manage the simple task. The small screen lit up, and my blood ran cold. The oxygen saturation level was 88%, dangerously low. Her lips had a faint bluish tinge. I'm calling 911, I choked out, already pulling my phone from my pocket. Tell them her O2 is dropping, and she has a known history of severe asthmatic anaphylaxis, Clara said, her focus entirely on Lily. Tell them to expedite. My fingers flew across the screen, my voice clipped and strained as I relayed the information to the dispatcher. Beside me, Clara administered a second puff from the inhaler. "Come on, sweet girl, breathe for me. That's it. Deeper now." Until she was coaching her, willing her to live, a warrior fighting an invisible enemy in the quiet of my children's playroom. I hung up with the dispatcher. "They're 5 minutes out." "5 minutes is too long," she said, her voice tight. She looked at me, her brown eyes blazing with an intensity that demanded my absolute trust. "Where is her EpiPen?" "Her what?" The question blindsided me. Lily didn't have an EpiPen. The allergist had mentioned it as a possibility for the future, but her reactions had never escalated this quickly before. It was always just the inhaler, the breathing treatments. A flash of disbelief, then raw frustration crossed Clara's face. She doesn't have an epinephrine auto-injector? For a child this sensitive? She shook her head, muttering under her breath. Unbelievable. She didn't have time for blame. She was already thinking, adapting. "Okay, new plan. Go to the kitchen, the big pantry. On the top shelf there's a jar of local honey I bought last week. And get a spoon. Hurry." Honey? Was she insane? My daughter was suffocating and she wanted honey? "What are you talking about? She needs medicine, not a sandwich spread." "Mr. Henderson, I don't have time to argue," she fired back, her voice a whip crack. "Local honey contains trace amounts of local pollen. In a microdose, it can sometimes calm an allergic hyperresponse. It's not a cure, but it might buy us the seconds we need. Now are you going to stand there and question me, or are you going to help me save your daughter's life?" Her certainty was absolute. It was the certainty of someone who knew, not someone who was guessing. Shamed and terrified, I turned and sprinted from the room. I ran through the silent, opulent house, my heart a frantic drum against the backdrop of the distant approaching sirens. I fumbled in the cavernous pantry, my eyes scanning the shelves. There it was, a small glass jar with a handwritten label, "Local Wildflower." I grabbed it and a spoon and ran back. When I re-entered the playroom, the scene had worsened. Lily's breathing was a shallow, raspy whistle. Her eyes were half closed, her small body limp in Clara's arms. The oximeter had dropped to 85%. "Here," I gasped, thrusting the jar and spoon at her. Clara took it without a word. She worked quickly, dabbing a tiny amount less than a pea onto the spoon, and carefully swiping it inside Lily's cheek. "It's okay, little flower," she murmured, her voice a desperate prayer. "Just a little longer. Help is coming." The sirens were screaming now, growing louder with each passing second. The wail was a sound of hope and of absolute failure. My failure. I stood there useless, a spectator at my own child's potential death, while this woman I had come home to fire was fighting for her, with a knowledge and courage I couldn't begin to comprehend. Paramedics burst through the front door I'd left ajar, their equipment-laden bags banging against the doorframe. I pointed them toward the playroom, my voice gone. They stormed in, a whirlwind of professional calm. Clara was already reciting Lily's history, her oxygen levels, the medications administered. She spoke their language fluently. 2 puffs of albuterol at 1522 and 1524. Suspected anaphylactic trigger. Unknown origin. O2 sats dropped from 92 to 85 in 3 minutes. The lead paramedic, a burly man with a kind face, nodded and immediately began setting up an oxygen mask. As he worked, he glanced at the honey jar on the floor. He looked at Clara, then at me, a flicker of professional curiosity in his eyes. They stabilized Lily, her oxygen levels slowly, agonizingly, ticking back up into the high 80s, then barely cresting 90 as they loaded her onto the gurney. "We're taking her to County General," the paramedic told me. "She's stable, but she needs to be monitored. You can ride with us." I nodded numbly, my world narrowed to the sight of my daughter's pale face. I turned to go, then stopped. Leo was still asleep in his crib, oblivious. And Clara? She stood by the window, her arms wrapped around herself, her face pale with exhaustion and aftershock. She looked small and incredibly weary. "I have to go with Lily," I said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "Leo." "I've got him," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "He's safe. Go. Be with your daughter." I followed the gurney out, my mind a chaotic swirl of fear and gratitude. At the hospital, hours blurred into a tense montage of waiting rooms and hushed conversations with doctors. Finally, a pediatric specialist came to speak with me. "Your daughter is going to be fine," she said, and I almost collapsed with relief. "She's responding well to the steroids. It was a severe reaction, but you got her help just in time. The paramedics mentioned your nanny administered a microdose of local honey?" I nodded, still confused by it. "Yes. Is that a real thing?" The doctor smiled faintly. "It's an old folk remedy. Anecdotal mostly. The science is debated. But in a situation like this where you're waiting for help to arrive, well, it certainly didn't hurt. In fact," she paused, checking her notes, "the initial stabilizing effect, however minor, may have prevented her from going into full respiratory arrest before the ambulance arrived. Whoever she is, your nanny has a remarkable head on her shoulders. She saved your daughter's life today, Mr. Henderson. No question." Her words echoed in the sterile quiet of the hallway. She saved your daughter's life. The woman I was going to fire. The woman my mother called incompetent. The woman who sang my dead wife's lullaby. I finally returned home well after midnight. The house was dark, except for a single soft light coming from the children's wing. I walked towards it, my steps heavy with exhaustion and a weight of emotion I couldn't begin to name. I pushed open the door to Lily's empty room and found Clara asleep in the rocking chair, a rumpled blanket pulled over her, Leo's baby monitor clutched in her hand. She had refused to leave him. She had stayed, a silent guardian in my broken home. I stood there watching her for a long moment, this stranger who knew the deepest secrets of my family. I had come home to fire her, but now, looking at her, I knew one thing with bone-deep certainty. I could never let her go. And a new, terrifying question began to form in the ruins of my certainty. Who was she? Really? That question haunted me for the next 2 days, while Lily recovered in the hospital. I sat by her bedside, holding her small hand, watching the steady beep of the monitors. But my mind was back at the house, replaying the scene in the playroom, re-examining every word Clara had spoken. She wasn't just a nanny who'd read a blog. There was a depth of knowledge there, a calm in the face of crisis that spoke of training, of experience. The way she diagnosed the anaphylaxis, her immediate call for the EpiPen, her knowledge of a folk remedy so obscure even the doctor was surprised it didn't add up. My mother called, of course. Her voice was a shrill instrument of panic and accusation. "I told you, Alistair. I told you she was a danger. What did she do? Did she feed Lily something? You must sue her. Ruin her." "It wasn't her fault, Mother," I said, my voice flat and cold. "The doctors think it was an environmental trigger, a new pollen in the air. Clara saved her life." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Saved her? Alistair, you're not making sense. She's the maid." "She's more than that," I said, and hung up the phone. I knew I would have to deal with my mother's meddling later, but right now I had to deal with the truth. I did something I should have done 3 months ago. I hired a private investigator. I gave him Clara's full name, Clara Evans, and told him to find out everything. I felt a pang of guilt, invading the privacy of a woman who had just saved my child. But the mystery was too great. I needed to know who I had sleeping under the same roof as my children. The report came back the morning I was bringing Lily home. I read the email on my phone in the hospital parking lot, the sterile scent of antiseptic still clinging to my clothes. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the attached file. Clara Evans wasn't a maid, or rather she hadn't always been one. She was a registered nurse, not just any nurse, but a pediatric respiratory specialist. She had worked for 10 years in the pediatric ICU at one of the country's top children's hospitals. She had published papers. She had spoken at conferences. The PI had attached a photo from one such conference brochure. There she was, 5 years younger, in a smart blazer. Her name printed below. Clara Evans, RN, BSN. The report detailed a stellar career that had come to an abrupt halt 2 years ago. The reason was listed as personal leave. She had never returned. After that, her employment history was spotty. A few temp jobs, clerical work, then the application to the domestic help agency. It was all there, the knowledge, the calm, the expertise. She hadn't been acting on a mother's intuition. She'd been acting on a decade of intensive medical training. She had downplayed her skills, hidden her past, and presented herself as a simple nanny to get a job caring for my children. But why? When we arrived home, Clara was waiting on the steps. She didn't rush forward, but her eyes were locked on Lily's face, her relief a palpable thing. Leo ran out squealing with delight to see his sister, and Clara gently guided him to her, reminding him to be gentle. Later that evening, after the twins were tucked into bed, I found her in the kitchen, wiping down the already immaculate counters. I held the printed report in my hand. "We need to talk, Clara," I said, my voice quiet. She turned, her expression guarded. She saw the papers in my hand, and a flicker of something resignation, maybe sadness, crossed her face. She knew. "I know who you are," I said, laying the report on the granite island between us. "Or who you were. A pediatric respiratory nurse at St. Jude's Children's Hospital, one of the best from the looks of it." She didn't deny it. She just nodded, her gaze fixed on the countertop. "My last patient," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "was a little boy named Thomas. He had the same rare condition as your twins. I was his primary nurse for almost a year. I loved him like he was my own." She took a shaky breath. "We did everything right. Every procedure, every protocol. But one night, a new virus was going through the ward. It was too much for his system. He arrested. I ran the code. I did compressions for 45 minutes. But we lost him." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "I couldn't save him. And after that, I couldn't go back. Every time I looked at a child on a ventilator, I saw Thomas. The hospital, the machines, the smell. It was too much. My skills felt like a mockery. So I left. I tried other jobs, but my heart wasn't in it. All I've ever wanted to do is care for children." She finally looked up at me, her soul bared in her tired eyes. "Then I saw your job posting through the agency. I read the description. The twins, their condition. It felt like a sign, a second chance, a way to use my knowledge away from the trauma of the hospital. I knew no one would hire an ex-PICU nurse with burnout to be a nanny. They'd think I was overqualified or unstable, so I left it off my resume. I just wanted to help. I read your wife's blog and I felt like I knew you. I knew them. I wanted to protect them in a way I couldn't protect Thomas." Silence filled the kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. All the pieces fell into place, forming a picture of a woman not of incompetence or deceit, but of profound grief and a desperate, quiet need to heal. She had sought refuge in my home, and in doing so, had become its guardian angel. I came home that day to fire her. I came home convinced she was a threat, but I was the one who had been a fool. I was the one who had been so lost in my own grief that I couldn't see the miracle that had walked through my door. I walked around the island until I was standing in front of her. "You didn't just help Clara," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You saved her. You saved us. What you did, it wasn't just a job. I reached out and did something I never thought I would do. I took her hand. I'm not paying you as a maid anymore. That's ridiculous. I want to hire you for who you are, as a full-time pediatric nurse and caregiver for my children. Whatever salary you want, your own suite of rooms, anything you need." She looked stunned, speechless. "I can't do this alone, Clara," I admitted, the confession costing me my pride but giving me a world of relief. "I need you. Leo and Lily need you. You're not hired help. You are a part of this family now, if you'll stay." For the first time, the tears she'd been holding back finally fell. She nodded, unable to speak, and squeezed my hand. In that moment, the cavernous, silent house didn't feel so empty anymore. It felt like the pieces of our shattered family were finally, slowly, being put back together. The dust could settle on the mantel, the silver could tarnish, because what truly mattered was safe, protected by a quiet, unassuming woman who had lost her way, only to find it again by saving mine. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt a glimmer of something I thought had died with Eleanor. Hope.